Just 1 minute, guys. Can you see my screen, everybody? Yeah? Okay, so let's go. Okay, grants management, as you know, is a module in Umoja, and we will use it to store information about contributions from sponsors. And it allows UN to manage contributions, monetary or in kind, from donor or sponsors, from pre-award administration to post-award management, and very, very important, reporting. It's very important, the reporting in this grants management module. Sometimes when UN is the grantor and provides funding to different grantees, for example, UN agencies or NGOs, is when we have in place the pass-through grants that we will see later on. So this is a summary of the process. You see, here we are, the United Nations. When we receive incoming grants from donors, we have to handle them in our system at the very end report. And if UN grantees are acting as implementing partners for the United Nations, is when UN will receive report from them, and in some occasions we report as well to the donors. So let's move ahead. So if I go a little bit quick, but we have to cover a lot of things. So we are going to see the different roles involved in this process. I will read them very quickly because you will have this presentation. You can read carefully all the roles and all the, let's say, tasks that they have assigned in the system. The main roles are the GM account user and the GM account approver. The GM grants creator is very similar to the GM account user, but in some substantive offices. So these are account user, account approver, and very important for you guys, because almost all of you are finance guys, people. The GM roles do not have access to FIT codes, but usually they go together. So if you have the GM roles, you will have for sure the FI roles assigned as well. Okay. Let's see. Then we have grants management, budget user and release, and budget approver and release, and grants management, budget user release, and budget approver released as well. We will see these roles in depth later on when we will go into the system. Then the grants management support user and grants management master data maintainer. Okay. Let's see now, very important slide, how the grants management module interacts with the different modules in Umoja system. You know that grants management is a kind of micro Umoja system itself because it touches almost all the modules. Once the donor agreement letter of acceptance is in place, the grants management process starts in the system. It's very important and it's very related with controlling module because we have to have internal orders to track revenue and expenditures for our grants in the system. And in some cases, we will have projects involved as well, because the grant can be designated to a project or part of a project, so the project management module is fully integrated with grants as well. So, okay, we have now to track the income of these agreements in our system. How? Through a sales order. Then we have the sales and distribution module as well, touch here, and of course finance and treasury and financial accounting if FI involved. Once we have let's say this income tracked in our system as a receivable, we have to allocate this amount to one fund. So the fund management module is impacted as well. Okay, and once this amount is allocated in this fund, the execution of the grant will begin. You know, purchase orders, fund commitments, fund reservations, fund pre-commitments that can be done against Remember, up to now in the funds management module, we had against a fund. Now we can do it against a grant as well. And at the very end, all these operations will end up in finance again. So as you can see, it's fully integrated with the Umoja system. Let's move ahead. And let's see now the master data related to this grant management module. The main master data elements. You know that the aim of this grant management module is to capture the details of the donor agreement in the system. So for this, we need to know very well which master data we have, how to create it in the system, and how to link all these master data together. So main elements for grants, we have grants, sponsor programs, and sponsor classes. Let's see a little bit deeper each one of them. Grant type. Okay. Each grant is defined as a grant type, and the grant type allows the user to manage grants to meet the sponsor requirements or the internal organization or system, Umoja system requirements. And it's very important because it's used to define grant controls and behavior. There are 4 different types of grants. Let me remark this because this is very, very important. You have to know and understand the difference between each one of the grants in Umoja. We have the simple grant, the resource mobilization grant, main implementation grant, and pass-through grant. It's very important when you create the grants in the system. We will see it later on when we will jump in. Because if you create one grant of the specific type, you cannot change it later on. If you make a mistake, select the type of grant, you will have to create a new one, selecting again the right type of grant. We will see it later on. Let's go to see what a simple grant is. Simple grant is a grant that is used when we have a single donor and its contribution is done in US dollars. And moreover, this donor requires a report on its specific contribution. Okay? In this case, the expenditures are not merged with other donors' contribution. And very important as well, because then later on we will connect the grants with the cost objects. This grant can track or record revenue and expenditures. Very important, this information, okay? So let's move to the next one. Everything okay? Any question? Am I going too fast? Okay. Nani, do we have any questions?
Yes, no, so far not. But please, just a reminder, please send out to all panelists your questions so we can monitor them in real time. Thank you.
Okay. So remember, we have seen what a simple grant is. I will refresh it very quickly. Simple grant is used when we have a single donor and the contribution is done in US dollars. And very important, this donor requires contribution only on its, requires reporting only on its contribution. Simple grant can track revenue and expenditures, important as well. Resource mobilization grant. This grant is used when a donor contributes to a funding pool. So if we have a funding pool, we will have 1 RM grant per donor. If we have 5 donors, we will have 5 RM grants. And this grant represents, can record only revenues. They are used to record revenue. So where will we record the expenditures? In a MIG MIC grant that will be linked to the RM grants. For example, we have 5 donors contributing to the same project or the same funded program, so we will have 5 resource mobilization grants and only 1 MIC grant that will be the one that will allow us to report on these pooled expenditures or funding pool. Is that clear? Okay, so let's go now. I almost mentioned what is a main implementation grant. This is the grant, again, created to provide funding to a program or project for a pooled group of donors. This MIG grant is linked to multiple RM grants and will record the expenditures. Remember, the R grant will record the revenue, and the MIG grant will record the expenditures. Very important when we have several resource mobilization grants linked to one MIG grant, the sponsor link, let's say, to the MIG grant is a dummy one. It doesn't make sense to have one sponsor because it's shared between some of them. But there is one exception, is that when we have only one donor and the contribution is not done in US dollars. Because remember that the simple grant can only be used when the contribution is in US dollars. So in this case of only one sponsor, but the contribution is done in a different currency that is not dollars, we will use one single resource mobilization grant linked to one single main implementation grant, sorry, one-to-one, okay? This is the framework 2 exception, it's called like that, and it's in a specific case for this, to implement this agreement, let's say. So I hope this one is clear, and let's go to the last type of grant, is the pass-through grant. And this grant is used when we have an implementing partner involved in this grant, one or many. We will have one P grant per implementing partner, and this implementing partner is defined as a UN grantee. Okay, so these are the 4 types of grants. I hope everything is clear. We will do an exercise together later on to check if you properly understood each type of grant. So let's move on and let's see what an sponsor program is now. What's an sponsor program? It's another Masterdata element involved in this grant management process, and represents the purpose of the contribution. So it's a program that needs to be funded, and it's linked to a cost object through a funded program. A sponsor program can be assigned individually, or it could be assigned to many grants depending on the agreement. For example, we can have one-to-many relationship with grants in cases where the purpose of the agreement with many donors is the same. So we will have only one sponsor program and many grants linked to this sponsor program. Okay? And the last Masterdata element involved in grants management is the sponsor class. The sponsor class supports reporting on income and expenditures, because it summarizes or splits how these expenses or revenues are tracked by categories. So we have 8 revised reporting categories: staff and personnel costs. You have all of them here written. It's a kind of a splitting on how this money is going to be spent during the grant life cycle. Okay. So apart from this grant management Masterdata that we have seen, we have our sponsor program, we have sponsor classes, and our 4 types of grants. There are other elements that are involved in this grant management process, that are the funds, the internal orders, and the work breakdown structure elements. The fund is coming from fund management module, the internal order from the controlling, and the WBSC is a little bit in the middle between controlling and project systems. But these 3 elements are fully integrated with grant management. Let's see. Related to the funds, in the grants management module, we are going to use three types of funds, three specific types of funds. The external fund, that represents the sponsor money that supports the grant, and it will start with 32. The internal fund, that is the funds that are used to track cost sharing agreed with the donor. For example, just for your knowledge, UN and direct cost recovery funds are also internal funds, and auxiliary funds that are used to record funding that UN gives to implementing partners. So if we have an implementing partner, we will have an auxiliary fund in place, always a 33 fund. Let's go now to the controlling objects that we are going to use to implement these agreements in our system. The internal order, as all of you already know, are controlling master data objects that can collect costs or revenues, but for specific events or simple projects that has a defined start and end dates. We are going to use two specific types of internal orders: grants management, revenue recognition internal orders that we will use to receive the income for the grant billing, and only S and RM grants require revenue internal orders. And afterwards, we have the expenditure internal orders that are used for collecting expenses. They are used in place of WBSE elements for short-term projects or one-off events, for simple activities, we can say. And as you can think about the cost center, that is another cost controlling element, but cost center are not used with grants for recording expenditures. We will use internal orders or WBSE elements. Okay? So let's see. The work breakdown structure element, I am not going to go very in deep in this because tomorrow we will have a session on project and we will see it deeply. But you can more or less guess. We have the work breakdown structure that is within a project, shows the work time and cost involved in a completing specific work component or task, and then within these WBS elements we have more specific items that are the work breakdown structure elements. It's like a subcategory or one sub-element within a project. But we will cover it tomorrow, so you will have time to understand it better. So I think we have seen mainly the master data that we are going to use, and now we are going to see that probably you will have heard about the Framework 1 and Framework 2. I will just mention it very quickly. Framework 1 is, let's say, the way of implementing an agreement in which the donor is represented by one grant. It is typically a simple grant, and as I mentioned before, when the grant is not in US dollars, we will use an grant linked to a MIG grant. Okay? So this is called Framework 1, and the main, I could say the main or most important thing that you have to take into consideration in Framework 1 is that the donors requires reporting on its own contribution. Okay? Okay, so let's see. Here we have our simple grant, sorry, the mouse, the donor contribution agreement, our simple grant, where we will track the incoming cash and expenditures, payments, and refunds. Remember that the simple grant can track revenue and expenditures, okay? So if we have implementing partners in place, we will have one P grant per implementing partner, and in these P grants we will track expenditures and payment posted and refunds by implementing partners. This is a very, let's say, simple situation. And it's called this kind of structure or implementation framework 1. Any questions, guys, about the framework 1?
Hi. Yes, just no questions really on the content, but I'm just working with Jennifer on chat to set up her audio. Apparently, it's not working.
Okay.
So, but here we are monitoring the chat. So, any questions, we are all of them are going to be welcomed. So, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you all. I hope you are not getting already lost because we are explaining many information. But as I mentioned now, in 10 minutes we will do a little bit exercise all together that will help us to wake up a little bit. Okay? Let's go now to the framework 2. Framework 2 is this, let's say, an implementation when we have more than one donor, and each donor is represented by a separate RM grant. These RM grants are linked together through a relationship to one unique grant that will contain posting of payments and other expenditures. Okay, so here we have, imagine we have 3 donors, 3 contributions, one grant per donor, and only one M grant that will link 3 of them, and where we will track expenditures and payment posted. In these 3 grants, we will record the revenue or the income, and exactly as before, we will have one pass-through grant per implementing partner if there is an implementing partner involved in this agreement. And in these pass-through grants, we will track expenditures and payment posted, refunds or refunds by this implementing partner. Very important. Framework 2, remember, Framework 2, donor requires reporting on pooled expenditures, okay? And we have more than one donor. Okay, so we are going to see now the life cycle of a grant in Umoja. Imagine that we have received, or we have the agreement signed with the donors, and we have to start implementing this agreement, let's say, in the system. For what? To record this income in our system as revenue, as a receivable, later on make this budget available in the system to be spent, later on spend this budget properly according to the donor agreement, and at the very end report to the donor on what did we do with this, let's say, money or income that was given to us. So we have this agreement signed, and we are going to start setting up in the system all the grants management master data that we will need. We have involved in this, let's say, action, the grants management creator and grant management user, a grant management approver. At admission level, the grants creator will not be given, so account users and GM account approver, okay? Master data. So this GM account user will create this, the type of grants that we will need in our process or in our agreement, and will maintain this master data. And very important as well, will monitor the cost objects. Okay. The grants are alive during the whole life of the process of the agreement. So these grants have to be changed, updated, the statuses have to change. We will see it later on in the exercise. So this is task assigned to the GM account user. So we have all our master data created in the system. Let's say grants management master data, sponsor program, and type of grants. Next step is to create the cost objects that we will need to track properly revenues and expenditures. As we mentioned before, we will have revenue recognition internal orders used for the grant billing, and expenditures internal orders or WBSCS elements for collecting expenses. If we have already a project link, or this grant is addressed for one specific project, we will not have to create the project. that we will have to update the WBS elements, the accounting information properly, whatever. But you have to take into consideration that based on the type of grant, and if they can record revenue and expenditures, we will need to create a number of cost objects to track everything, okay? And very important as well, before moving the grant to the status of work operational, the internal order for revenue has to be created and linked to the grant, okay? So I think that's it from the cost objects creation. Let's move to the next step. So we have the grants master data that we need and the cost object that we need to, let's say, create this agreement in our system. Now we have to create and approve an unreleased grant budget. This grant budget reflects how the budget is going to be spent. This budget is not for consumption. It's, let's say, a kind of plan on how this money is going to be spent. In fact, if we have a project involved or a project in this grant, and there is a cost project plan, this unreleased budget has to be, let's say, consequent or coherent with this cost plan, okay? More important things, okay, the sponsor's donation can include or not indirect cost, so it's very important to take it into consideration because the about to budget has to be calculated directly by the user if it is not included, and if it is included, the indirect costs are automatically calculated, okay? After we create and approve and release budget, that you can think about it, as I mentioned, as a plan. Let's say, how are we going to spend this money? For travel, for training, for whatever. You have to, let's say, plan how you are going to spend it. So the next step is to build the income coming from the donors. And these two steps, the creation of an approval of the unreleased budget and the billing process, can be done in parallel. The only thing or prerequisite that is common is that the status of the grant has to be a work operational. Don't worry about the statuses because we will see them later on. So we have our master data, we have our cost objects created in the system, we have created a kind of plan on how we are going to spend this money, and now we are going to receive or to track this income in our system, this receivable. For monetary contributions, the income or an account receivable are recorded. For goods, the value that will be recorded will be the stated in the agreement, and if not stated, a fair market value. And for services, right to use will be recorded as income and expenditure. Okay? So we have received or tracked this income in our system. So what we have to do now, release this budget according to our previous plan in order for this money or this budget to be spent properly in accordance always with the requirements of the donor that are compiled in the donor agreement. Okay. For project activities that are executed by implementing partners, this part of this budget is transferred from the S or MIG grant to the pass-through grant, the corresponding part that is agreed with the implementing partner. And very, very important, to release that funds and to make them ready to be spent, a cost object for expenditures is needed, and it has to be created in the system and properly recorded in the sponsor program. Okay? Don't worry about it because we will see it in the exercises. So, we have any question? Yes.
Yes. Teodorus Lucas is asking who is actually setting up the grant. Is it the mission or is New York through headquarters?
This is a very good question, Cedar. In fact, up to now, it was done, except for few missions, it was done centrally in New York. We don't have yet clear instructions on how this process is gonna be done from now on, but we heard that maybe it will be done at mission level. Anyway, we will try to clarify this because many changes have been done since we delivered this training up to now. In fact, regarding the implementing partner that we will see on Wednesday, there will be many changes too. So let us clarify this. But we heard that in the mission, you will have to take action now on the grants. So that's good that you know how it works. And if we can confirm it with New York, we will come back to you, okay, with more information. Thanks a lot for your question. Okay. So let me recap everything again. We have our master data created in the system. We do our plan, our unreleased budget plan. We perform the billing. The income is in our system. And we have assigned this budget, let's say, to the corresponding funds, ready to be spent. So now what do we have to do? To spend this money accordingly with the agreement with the donors. How is it spent? So through, you know, fund commitments, fund reservation, fund commitments, shopping carts, trips, purchase orders. And once you have the grant properly implemented in Umoja system, once you enter the PO or the fund commitment, the information of the grant should be automatically derived or populated. If not, we should indicate the internal order or project that is linked to the grant. Okay? So this is, let's say, the execution of the grant, how we spend this money. And lastly, the IDC costs are posted against the grant, and this is performed by a, let's say, batch program at Central in New York, the IDC relevant, not relevant calculation, okay? So once the project or the activity funded by the grant has finished or is completed, the next step is to close the grant. There are several stages. We will see them more deeply on Thursday. 3 stages: the operational closing of the grant, the financial closing, and the final closure. During the operational closing, all open commitments within the grant should be completed and liquidated, and WES elements are closed properly. The grant user should coordinate with the project manager to ensure that the project is closed as well. They should be closed everything together. Financial closing, the cash receipts and refunds to the donors are allowed, and the final closure, no transaction is allowed in the system related to this grant. In fact, all type of transactions charging the grant are blocked, and the user will get an error if they try to consume some budget coming from this grant. Okay. So during the whole process of the grant, from the very beginning when we implement it, during the execution and the closure, is very important to report. Internal reports and reports to the donors. We have here the main T codes that we will use to report. We will see in a specific session on reporting on Thursday. But you know, during the whole process, the reporting will be a very important part. So let's recap the process before doing a small exercise altogether. Here we have our donors, that one or several that will require reporting on pooled expenditures or on its own contribution if we have only one. Okay. So first thing that we have to do, set up grants management master data. The details of the agreement will be tracked with this specific type of grants and sponsor program. Okay. Next step, creation of the cost objects, revenue or expenditures, depending on the type of grants involved in the process. If we have already a project created in the system, we don't need, of course, to create it again. Okay. These two steps, of course, can be done in parallel. You can set up the grants management master data or create the cost objects in parallel, one before the other. But the most important thing is that they have to be properly linked at the very end. Okay. Next step, unreleased grant budget for S&M grants. The user has to budget how the money is going to be spent among the different sponsor classes. If there is a project, I already mentioned it before, and a project plan, the unreleased budget has to be consistent with this project plan. This makes sense. Okay. Then we have the billing, and once again, these two steps can be done in parallel as well. The billing is just to receive the income into our system as a receivable, okay? And the only prerequisite for these two steps is that the grant is in status award of operational. Next step, release the grant budget. For this release of grant budget, the billing process has to be done, and moreover, I dare to say that we should wait for the income already tracked in our accounts, physical accounts. Why? To avoid cash availability problems. Because you know that sometimes the billing process is done, but the money has not been received yet. So we want to avoid cash availability problems. We should wait before release the budget, okay? So this budget is released in accordance with the reporting requirements in the donor agreement. So once we have our money ready to be spent, we will spend it properly. Funds pre-commitments, funds reservations, fund commitments, shopping carts, whatever. And once all the activities have been done related with this grant, we will close our grant and it's done. But something is missing, very important, the reporting. During the whole life of the grant, we will be reporting internally to track if we are doing things properly, how everything is going on, and to inform the donors about the status of their contributions. So that's it. I think it has been a little bit quick, but I hope it's mainly clear. Yes, we have some questions, Danny?
Yes, question related to the grant closure. Once we close the grant and there is any pending money to be left, is there anything that we have to do in the grants management module in Umoja in order to send back the remaining money to the member states? Over to you.
Very good question, Danny. Yeah, it depends on the agreement with the donor, but yes, there is let's say, a case where there is a refund to the donor of the money that was spent. Yeah, we will see this. This can be set. This is in the donor agreement signed, and in the system, there is an option where you can tell, okay, after everything, the money left, we will go back to the donor. Some more questions?
Yes, yeah. And then we have another question from Emil. Emil is asking, what would be in your based on point of view the major difference between a grant and a trust fund?
I would say that the main difference is the way it is reported. Yeah. Because with the implementation in the system is totally different, you will see, but you can have a better track of everything. Yeah, if you create all the agreement based on the grants. Anyway, David, do you have something to add to this question? Nothing? So, okay. So, okay, so let's now, if you don't mind, let me open your mics. If you have mics, or if not, you can. Yes, David.
Yeah, sorry, I was speaking, but could you please rephrase the question for me? So in
Yes.
case I can
Yes,
answer.
Danny, please.
Hi, David. Emil was asking what would be the major difference between a grant and a trust fund.
Okay, so the grant is basically the tool, right, or the master data that we use to manage all the process where we are receiving funds. Then the grants are linked to the trust funds. Okay, so the trust funds are the funds, for example, that they are starting with 3.
With
Okay,
32,
so
yes.
you will need a grant if you have a donor agreement, if you are receiving funding from a sponsor. Now, before Umoja, we were using these two terms without making any difference. So if you have in your mission is using trust funds, you probably have a grant in the system. Okay.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, the reporting can be done more, let's say, more in detail when you have all this information properly tracked through each type of grant, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So that basically it's strongly related, the grant and the trust fund. So the trust fund is in the FM, on the FM side, right? And yeah, the grant is on the grants management side, and it's basically the tool that we are using to manage the process. I hope that clarifies. Otherwise, Emil, you can write through the chat again the question.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Okay.
Thank you, David.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we are going now to play a game all together. Okay? If you agree, let me just get, if you don't have a microphone, feel free to write. Yeah, I'm going to unmute. Okay, because we are going to do a small game. Wow. I think maybe better to do it writing. Daniel, what do you think? Yeah, because this is, yeah. So let me, guys, sorry. We are many people, and just let me mute all. So feel free to write, please, but I want to see that you are awake, that you have been following all the theory that we have been telling you guys. So we have this scenario. Okay, the Office of a Special Envoy of the Great Lakes region has received a contribution from the government of Sweden and Netherlands to fund a workshop. Let's assume a workshop as a simple activity. They require reporting on pool expenditures. Okay, the total contribution is for USD 1 million and USD 700,000 respectively, to be utilized from 1st January to 31st of December 2019. So now we have our scenario, our agreement, and we have to track all the agreement or situation in our system to be able to report properly all the things. So we are going to create, first of all, grant management master data that we need, and cost collectors or cost objects as well. So can anyone tell me which type of grants would be involved in this process? Remember, we have 2 donors. The contributions are in dollars, and let's say the program that is going to be funded is a very simple one. So apparently we don't have a project involved. So first of all, which type of grants we would have involved in the process? Nani, any answer from there? Guys, be brave. It's very easy. First, I will help you. Do we have one single donor? No. So the S grant is, we are not going to use it. If we are not using the S grant, which type of grant will we use? No answers? I hope that this is because you are shy. not because you don't know, okay? Okay, first of all, let me start to break the ice. We will have a sponsor program in the system. Yeah, we will create a sponsor program for this workshop, or yeah. And we will have to create one grant from the government of Sweden and one grant for the government of Netherlands. Why? Because we have more than one donor and they want their reporting on pooled expenditures. Okay? Even if the contribution is in dollars, we will use the grant because we have two donors. Is this clear? Clear for everybody?
Yes, just to give credit to Emil, she said that yes, two grants will be involved, M grants and one MIG grant, right?
Perfect, very good, Emil.
So
Thank you.
To give credit to Emil, she was on top of it.
Thanks a lot, my dear. Thanks a lot. And now we'll make it easier. Now we have to know which cost objects we will need. Remember that we have to receive the income from each one of the donors. We will have one revenue internal order for this R grant and another revenue internal order for this R grant. And what about expenditures? Where we will track the expenditures? As I mentioned before, it was a clue. We assume that we don't have a project involved because it's a very easy activity with a specific start and end date. So which cost object we will use to track the expenditures? We will use an expenses internal order. So very easy, I think. This is the grants master data that we will need to start working in the system. Okay, let's see another scenario, a little bit more difficult. Emil, I trust my lady. Let's go. The Office for Disaster Risk Reduction has an approved project preventing natural disasters funded by the government of Germany. The contribution is in dollars, in US dollars, and we have only one donor, the government of Germany. But in this scenario, the office has an interagency agreement with the World Meteorological Organization to implement the project. Okay? So, I will break the ice again. We will have an sponsor program, first master data object that we will create in the system, and how many grants we will have here and type of these grants. Any brave student? First question that you have to ask yourself. We have quick answers, Danny?
Yes, well, in terms of grant structure, Emil is saying that we shall have one simple grant as one, and a pass-through for the implementing partner, which is the WHO.
Perfect, Emil. You have 10 over 10, A+.
Yes,
yeah,
and to give credit to the Wodros, Lucas, as well, he said the same thing, one S and one pass-through, let's say.
Perfect, my guys. This is exactly, I will give you a tip. First question that you have to ask yourself, how many donors do we have? Only one? Then we have an S grant involved. Only if the contribution is in US dollars. Remember this. If the contribution is in a different currency, we will have one R grant linked to one M grant. But in this case, we have only one donor and the contribution is in US dollars, so we will have one S1 grant. What else? Do we have an implementing partner in place? Yes, we have an implementing partner in place. So we will have a P grant involved. How to track the revenue here for the S grant with the revenue internal order, and how to track the expenditures for this, let's say, a scenario with a project. And as you can see here, I added 2 colors. You see? Because the expenditures of the S grant will be tracked as part of this project in 1, 2, or several work breakdown structures, and some part of this project will be given to our implementing partner. So in this same project, in a different WESC, let's say, element, we will track the expenditures for the implementing partner. So is that clear for everybody? So we are going to take a break of 5 minutes because I think we all need it. And after this, we are going to see a different scenario that we have. We will work together on it, which master data elements we need. And this time we will jump into the system and we will do this. We will create all this master data and properly link everything in the system because I want you to see how it is done. Okay? Has received a contribution from the government of Australia to fund a training for an emergency response in Syria. The total contribution is for US dollars 500,000 to be utilized from 1st of January to 31st of December 2019. As we did again. Which master data are we going to create in our system? I think this one is very easy. We are going to create a sponsor program. How many donors we have? 1 donor. The contribution is in US dollars. So we will have an S1 grant. And regarding cost objects, which cost objects we will need to create in the system? We will need a revenue internal order and an expenses internal order because there is not a project involved. It's a very easy activity. So this will be our master data. Okay? Let's see now what we are going to do in the system, the process. Yes, I want to see this visual description for you to understand it better. This is the money from our donor. We will create a sponsor program. First of all, and an S1 grant, simple grant that will be linked. We are going to go now more in details because we will do it in the system. Will be linked to the sponsor program in the S grant. We will have a reference to the sponsor program. We will create a revenue internal order that will be linked to the S grant as well. In the grant, we will have a reference to the internal order, and in the internal order, we will have a reference to the grant. Okay? And once we link these 2 objects, the system, Umoja system, will automatically generate a sales order, automatically generated. We will not have to create it anymore. So once we have this sales order in place and the status of the grant will be the proper one, word operational, then we are able to bill this money as a receivable in Umoja system, and we will use this revenue internal order. Okay? Next step. We will create an unreleased budget. As I mentioned before, it's a kind of plan on how this budget is going to be distributed through the sponsor classes. And we will have to create an expenses internal order to track all the expenditures that will be done for this grant. The expenses internal order will be linked to the sponsor program. As you see the arrows, in the sponsor program we will have a reference to the expenses internal order, and in the internal order we will have a reference to the sponsor program. Okay? Once we have this expenses internal order, we will release this budget. We will make this money or this budget ready to be consumed. Yeah, we have a question?
Yes, so Michael's asking whether, in terms of like a concept-wise, the part of unreleased budget and then released budget will be something related to like the budget that it's consumable or not from the FM point of view, whether from appropriation goes to consumable budget, something like that.
Not exactly. Let me try to make you understand this concept. The unreleased budget is a kind of pre-step that will help us to create the release budget. And this budget and release is not for consumption. It's a kind of plan. How are we going to distribute this amount, this $500,000 in the different sponsor classes? So 100 here, whatever. So and then this will be the pre-step necessary to do the release of the budget. But this is the one that will be ready for consumption. This one is let's say a kind of plan or distribution on how it's going to be spent, but has no, there is no track of it in the funds management module. You cannot report it. It's just a kind of pre-step for releasing the budget. Okay. And as you can see here, this is in red because it's not real money. It's just a plan how it's going to be spent. I hope this answers your question. Okay. So once we have the expenses internal order in our system, we will release this budget, and this budget will be ready to be consumed. So this is what right now we are going to do in our system, all this process. Okay, from the creation of the master data to the release of this budget. This is, let's call it, the implementation of the agreement or the grant. After all, the grant execution will come, and the grant execution will consume budget from this one, the one that we have already released, and after everything, the grant will be closed. And during the whole life, we will report. This is for you more detail, the components that we will have and how are they linked to each other. Okay?